Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to take a look at factoring. So our definition of factoring there at the top is writing a number or term as the product of simpler numbers or terms. So we're going to take out numbers that all three of these parts have in common. We're going to take a look at a couple trinomials. So these each have three parts. This has a x squared term, an x to the first power term, and an x to the 0, because when we have something to the 0 power, that becomes 1 and drops out. In this case, or 48 times 1. So when I look at this trinomial, it has three parts. We're going to take out what they all have in common. So looking at this is an even number, this is an even number, and this is an even number. In fact, they're all multiples of 4. So I can factor out, I can unmultiply that number that they all have in common. So factoring is a little bit like division, but it's more like unmultiplying. So I am going to unmultiply by 4. This would be 4 times 1. Because we remove the 4, we factor out the 4, that leaves us with the 1. We have 4 times 7, that gives us 28. So this is going to be, when we remove the 4, we factored it out, 7x. This is going to be 4 times 12, so we factored out that 4, and that leaves us with a 12. So when we're factoring, we're looking for what things have in common, what is a multiple of each of those, and so since it was a factor of 4, we unmultiply that, we remove that out front, and we write down what we have remaining. From there, I'm just going to consider the things inside the parentheses. This 4 is going to go along for the ride, but it's going to stay on the outside the whole time. And then we're going to use our diamond puzzle. So I draw the x. At the top, we're going to have two numbers multiplied together. At the bottom are going to be two numbers added together. I take this number out front, so that's a 1. Once we remove the 4, we only have a 1 left, times this number back here, 12. 1 times 12 is 12. And both of those were positive. That's important as well to include the sign. This is a positive 7, so I put that down below. When we're working with our diamond puzzle, we want to consider what are things that multiply to give us 12. So I could do 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. We're looking for the combination that adds to be 7, that would add to be 13, that would add to be 8, 3, and 4. We use that combination to split apart that middle term. So this is a skill that we built in the last couple videos, in the last couple sessions. So we're going to take this 4x, and one of these becomes a positive 3x, and the other one becomes a 4x. Then from there, we're going to group those individual terms together. So we move that 4 down. It just kind of goes along for the ride. And between these two, what do we have in common? Well, the thing that these two have in common is a multiple of x. So we're going to factor that out from these two things. So that becomes just like that. X up front. This was x squared, so that leaves us with a factor of x plus 3. Just like how we removed the 4 from both of those, we remove an x from here and an x from here. We compare these two, what is a multiple of both 4x and 12? Well, that would be a factor of 4 again. So when we remove that 4, that leaves us with just the x. When we factor 12, that would be 4 times 3. So when we factor out that 4, that leaves us with a 3. One way to kind of know if you've done this correct or not is these two should always be the same. So these are both x plus 3, so that's important. Then, again, this 4 stays out front of our big set of parentheses. On the inside of those, we have the same term, x plus 3 and x plus 3. So just like how we factored out the 4 at the beginning, just like how we factored out the x in this step here and the 4 in this step here, we're going to unmultiply. What both of these have in common is they have a multiple of x plus 3. So we unmultiply that factor of x plus 3, and we write down what we have left over. From here we have an x left over, and from here we have a plus 4. And I can slide that parenthesis in a little bit if that's easier to look at, but that's what our solution looks like. When we factor that, our answer is 4x plus 3 times x plus 4. Those are the terms that multiply together to give us that original expression. When we take a look at this next problem here, we are going to look for what do all three of these have in common? Is there any greatest common factor that I can remove from all of those? Sometimes there will be, and sometimes there won't. In this case, again, these are all even, so we can factor out a 2. This would be 2 times 4, this would be 2 times 5, and this would be 2 times 6. Because this is odd, that means that we can't go any smaller with this one, and that's also prime. So we're going to take out the 2, and that leaves us with 4x squared minus 5x and minus 6. So we removed that factor of 2 that all three of those had in common and wrote down the coefficient, the number that was associated with each of those. Just like we've done in the previous problems, we take this number out front, that's a 4, times this number back here. That's going to be a 6, and that's going to be the top of our diamond. Our two numbers, 4 and negative 6, those multiply together to give us negative 24. This number on the bottom here is negative 5. So we want things that multiply together to give us 24. So that could be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. So we need to consider, because this is a negative, that one of these numbers is going to have to be negative. So when I look at these, I want two numbers that are 5 apart. So 3 and 8 right there. If I have one of those being negative, let's say if 8 was negative, that would give me 3 plus negative 8 when I add them together. If this was a negative, it would be negative 3 plus 8. We want the bigger number to be negative because this bottom number here, when they add together, that's supposed to be a negative. That happens when the larger number, when they're different signs, is negative. So once again, we go over here, we write that 2 out front, and we use our factors on the sides of the diamonds to split this apart. So this is going to be a minus 8x and a plus 3x minus 6. So this 2 goes along for the ride, and I look at these first two. What do both of these have in common as a multiple? Well, they have two things. They have a 4 and an x. If I remove the 4, that leaves us with just a 1. If we remove the x, there's 2 of them, so that leaves us with 1x. Right here, we remove the factor of 4, so that leaves us with a 2. We remove the x, so that is multiplied out front. We look here, we look for, all right, what's a multiple between 3 and 6? Well, that common multiple is going to be a positive 3. So that leaves us with an x when we unmultiply, when we factor that out, minus 2. This is a 1x here, just for the reference. And again, both of these are the exact same thing. We have 1x and minus 2. So we can factor out what both of these terms have in common. They both have an x minus 2. So parentheses, 1x minus 2, and then we write what they have left over. When we remove that 1x minus 2, we have this 4x and plus 3. And that is everything factored out, everything multiplied in its individual parts.